Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and you are tuned into Questions for Corbett. And this week on the D program, boy, do I have a data dump of information for you, so I hope you have a pen and paper ready at your disposal and are prepared to take copious notes. But don't worry, I have you covered as usual. The show notes for today's edition of the podcast will be particularly full of interesting information, so I hope you will go to CorbettReport.com and take advantage of that resource. But let's get into the question. The question this week comes from a Corbett Report member who left his question in the Corbett Report comment section, specifically Magic Bullet, who recently wrote, "Is there a financial smoking gun of foreknowledge of corona before the first report of breakout in China? That would hint on the engineered versus natural birth of COVID-19, not just Event 201, but some stock trading or other transactions." All right, thank you very much for the question, Magic Bullet, and we're going to expand that answer out. I know you're looking specifically for financial foreknowledge, and I think there are a couple of interesting tacks to pursue in that regard, but let's expand it out to the broader question of foreknowledge of the coronavirus pandemic, because I think that really does speak to the potential, as you say, to really sort out the question of engineered versus natural birth of COVID-19. So I would start by saying, although, again, you're focusing on financial matters, so you say not just Event 201, but I want to caution against dismissing Event 201 lightly, because it does seem to me, if there is a smoking gun to the coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing right now, in a similar way that WTC7, for example, is a smoking gun on 9/11, I would say Event 201 is a smoking gun of what we're experiencing right now for a number of different respects and reasons. And I don't say this lightly because, as you will recall from my conversation with Chuck Ocelli that I had a month and a half ago at this point, or 18 lifetimes ago, it feels like. I did say at that time, I know there's been pandemic planning going on for decades, so it isn't necessarily a smoking gun that they were talking about a coronavirus pandemic in October of 2019, exactly as the global coronavirus pandemic was breaking out. But having stewed on it and examined Event 201 in greater depth, the more I look at it, the more it does seem like that smoking gun to me. Not just the participants that were there, for example, the Chinese CDC being involved in that exercise, despite the fact that the CAPS pandemic that they were simulating broke out in Central America or South America. It wasn't even about China, but for some reason the head of the Chinese CDC and other players who are absolutely crucial to what's going on right now were involved in that exercise, which, let's remember, was hosted by the Center for Health Security, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which, if you go to their website and note their previous exercises, they have held a total of 4 exercises, one of which was Event 201, another of which was Dark Winter. Yes, that Dark Winter that simulated a smallpox attack, a bioterror attack on the U.S. in June of 2001, just a few months before the anthrax attacks of 2001. And as I've talked about before, just as Dark Winter blamed that fictional bioterror attack on essentially the Iraqi government supplying Afghan terrorists or Afghan sheltered terrorists, so too did, of course, we see the U.S. government try to blame Iraq for the anthrax attacks of 2001. It was linked in the public imagination, and they had wargamed it out in exquisite detail in a 2-day exercise held by the Center for Health Security just a few months before. Now we have Event 201 simulating a global coronavirus pandemic right before a novel coronavirus, or actually, as we are led to believe, just as a novel coronavirus was starting to spread around the world. So, very interesting. And of course, the other 2 exercises that the Center for Health Security has participated in, Clade X and Atlantic Storm, held in 2005 and 2018, deserve greater scrutiny. So perhaps we will delve into that in more detail in the future. But as I say, I think Event 201 is a very good candidate for a smoking gun of foreknowledge of the coronavirus pandemic. So I want to underline that, first of all. But when looking for other signs of foreknowledge, generally speaking, of the pandemic, I know you were looking specifically for financial foreknowledge, but before we get into that, just looking casting our net broadly at the overall subject of foreknowledge, just like 9/11, we have to be careful about limited hangouts that, through their very narrative really reinforced the official story of the event. So, for example, just as the presidential daily briefing, as we know, August 6th, 2001? I think I know that date off the top of my head, despite the fact I haven't even studied this in years, but because we've been told the presidential daily briefing, and what was that entitled? Oh, I think it was something like Bin Laden determined to attack the United States, says Condoleezza Rice, and that, of course, became one of those gasp moments. Oh, you see, they knew Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were going to attack the United States, and that, of course, allows the main narrative to be implanted in the public consciousness, so that you can say, oh, you see, the Bush administration were bumbling, incompetent fools who allowed who, through their incompetence, enabled Al-Qaeda to attack the United States, as opposed to, of course, the real underlying narrative of Al-Qaeda actually being equipped and functionalized and made possible through the U.S. intelligence agencies, which have been puppeteering them all along, which is the deeper level of that narrative that doesn't get presented in that limited hangout. So what's the coronavirus equivalent of that? It would be something like the story that, of course, did make quite a bit of news coverage when it was first going around a couple of weeks ago, or 3 lifetimes ago. For example, the BBC reporting coronavirus, U.S. senators face call to resign over insider trading, where, of course, we've seen, there were some senators that were basically dumping stocks and ahead of the sense of the emergency in the United States. Obviously, after they'd been briefed about what was happening in China, etc., and how it was spreading, and etc., etc., and the implication being, yes, the senators were using their inside intelligence information basically to commit insider trading to get out of the stock market before it collapsed. Which, again, let's draw the parallel directly. Yes, this again is a way of reinforcing the narrative that, no one knew, and of course the stock market collapse is just about coronavirus and these senators. Look, it's these 4 senators that were using their inside knowledge from their government briefings, and that's about as far as it goes, which isn't very far when you think about it. So, although, again, it's something worthy of attention, but not that much attention. I think it's not the underlying story of this global pandemic and what's really behind it. So we can get a little bit closer to something approaching the truth through this article, which I did mention recently, but I want to get into it in a little more detail right now. Scott Ritter penned it, and it was posted at the American Conservative up a couple weeks ago. It's called "The Staggering Collapse of U.S. Intelligence on the Coronavirus." And he writes, "It is the job of the U.S. intelligence community to provide senior U.S. government policymakers, including the president, with advance warning about potential crises. The U.S. taxpayer pays a premium for this service. In 2020, the budget for the National Intelligence Program, which includes all programs, projects, and activities of the U.S. intelligence community, was $62.8 billion. Included in this budget is a small, specialized intelligence unit known as the National Center for Medical Intelligence, which operates as part of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The mission of the NCMI is to serve as the lead activity within the Department of Defense for the production of medical intelligence, and to prepare and coordinate integrated all-source intelligence for the DoD and other government and international organizations on foreign health threats and other medical issues to protect U.S. interests worldwide." Moving on. He says, "Moreover, by analyzing the characteristic of some 27 genomes of the COVID-19 virus provided by the Chinese and published by the Global Initiative on Sharing All Influenza Data, research scientists were able to determine that the most recent common ancestor for the coronavirus could be dated back to as early as October 1st, 2019. The importance of this date as it relates to the NCMI is that in mid-October 2019, a delegation of 300 U.S. military athletes arrived in Wuhan to participate in the 2019 Military World Games. China has suggested that these personnel might have introduced the coronavirus infection to Wuhan, citing their own research that suggests that the virus was introduced into China from elsewhere, and Japanese and Taiwanese studies that point to the U.S. as the likely source of the virus. There is, however, no independent evidence to support these allegations. The importance of the U.S. military athletes rests in the fact that the NCMI is responsible for conducting threat briefs for all deployments of military personnel worldwide, which meant that a Wuhan-specific infectious disease risk assessment would have necessarily been prepared in support of this deployment. Infectious disease risk assessments are the bread and butter intelligence product produced by the NCMI's Infectious Disease Division, one in which the totality of the medical intelligence collection and analytical capabilities would be utilized. The production of a Wuhan-specific infectious disease risk assessment would have created a window of opportunity for the NCMI to have collected the kind of medical intelligence that could have provided early warning about the existence of the coronavirus. Moreover, these athletes should have been subjected to screening upon return as part of the National Biosurveillance Program, providing yet another opportunity for early detection of the coronavirus if anyone had been exposed to it during their travel. The CDC had recently acknowledged during a hearing of the House Oversight Committee on March 11th that its biosurveillance program had uncovered evidence that Americans who had previously died to what had originally been diagnosed as influenza have, through post-mortem testing, been found to have actually perished from the coronavirus. Normally, the details obtained from this kind of biosurveillance would be widely shared to better understand the scope and potential spread of the infection, as well as to better pin down the source and timing of the infections. So, in this Scott Ritter article, essentially what he's saying is there definitely were detailed reports that were produced just as part of the routine duties of this NCMI unit that would have included specific infectious disease risk assessment for Wuhan, would have included biosurveillance of returning athletes from the Wuhan Games, that would have picked up whatever kind of coronavirus may or may not have been circulating to the extent that it could have been picked up at that time. That would have been... There should, at any rate, there should be reports that are on record somewhere that will say something to that effect. Either they found something or they didn't or whatever, but that's data that so far, at least when Scott Ritter wrote this article, well, we haven't seen that. It hasn't been released. What's happening? Which, again, does include certain parts of the mainstream narrative embedded in it. The idea that this did originate in Wuhan in October 2019, like the mainstream story has it. But at any rate, it does involve specific documents that do exist and must exist out there somewhere that have something to do with this story and what was or was not known at what time, and also what may or may not have been covered up. And of course, the Wuhan military games, injecting another possible vector into this whole story if we're talking about potential bio attack of some sort. Again, as the Chinese government itself has even intimated. Things are getting serious when polite diplomatic speak is accusing other nuclear superpowers of bioterror. These things are getting pretty crazy. But now, notice that in that story, there's a couple of different things. There's the general, well, where was the NCMI in all of this? Or were they asleep at the switch kind of thing? And then there's the very specific information about, well, they should have had reports on Wuhan and biosurveillance of these military athletes, etc. But that kind of gets to the wayside, and instead the sort of, what was the NCMI report? Where is it became the focus. And actually, ABC, of all places, picked up on this. Intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November, sources. As far back as late November, U.S. intelligence officials were warning that a contagion was sweeping through China's Wuhan region, changing the patterns of life and business and posing a threat to the population, according to 4 sources briefed on the secret reporting. Concerns about what is now known to be the novel coronavirus pandemic were detailed in a November intelligence report by the military's NCMI, according to 2 officials familiar with the document's contents. The report was the result of analysis of wire and computer intercepts coupled with satellite images. It raised alarms because an out-of-control disease would pose a serious threat to U.S. forces in Asia, forces that depend on the NCMI's work. And it paints a picture of an American government that could have ramped up mitigation and containment efforts far earlier to prepare for a crisis poised to come home. Analysts concluded it could be a cataclysmic event, one of the sources said of the NCMI's report. It was then briefed multiple times to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's Joint Staff, and the White House. Wednesday night, the Pentagon issued a statement denying the product assessment existed. Etc., etc. So, again, let's put this in that sort of 9/11 framework. Again, this is like an intelligence failure, like the failure of the air defenses on 9/11, where we had the systematic stand down and misdirection and confusion of the